Purtroppo c'è un problema di connessione. Il collega Johannes Auenmüller è in Egitto sul campo in questo momento, quindi speriamo che ricompaia a breve.
Sì.
Eccolo, benissimo. Intanto ti presento, grazie mille Johannes di essere qui con noi. Johannes Auenmüller è curatore al Museo Egizio di Torino dal 2020. Ha conseguito un dottorato di ricerca in egittologia presso il centro di eccellenza Topoi della Freie University di Berlino, con una tesi sulla territorialità e l'identità spaziale dell'elite del nuovo regno egiziano. Johannes ha svolto ricerche sulle tecnologie di fusione del bronzo presso l'Università di Bonn, e ce ne parlerà oggi, e sulla struttura sociale della Nubia durante il nuovo regno presso la Ludwig Maximilian University di Monaco. Ha condotto attività di ricerca presso le università di Berlino, di Lipsia, di Bonn e Monaco, a Münster, dove è stato assistente di ricerca prima di ottenere il suo incarico a Torino. Ha partecipato a scavi in Austria, in Egitto e in Sudan. Le sue principali aree di interesse includono la sociologia e la prosopografia regionale dell'Egitto faraonico, la tecnologia di produzione dei metalli, la fusione del bronzo, l'archeologia insediativa e lo studio delle iscrizioni rupestri in Nubia. Grazie mille Johannes, a te la parola.
Yes, before I need to find a way to close this screen here. Does anyone have an idea? It's working now? Okay, perfect. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. So thank you, Giulio, for the nice introduction, and sorry again for all the connection issues. Let's hope that the internet and the hotspot will remain stable. So, well, I'm going to talk about a particular project that also brings me back in time into also my initial times of contact with archaeometallurgy, namely a study of a group of unique objects that were found by a project of University of Bonn. I will tell you some more details later. And that was studied particularly at Egyptian Museum of Bonn University, because all the objects are now stored or kept there at the small university museum. Given also the fact that we were working in a small university museum context, we were very happy to receive funding from the Fritz Thyssen Stiftung. So without this money, we would not have been able to kind of achieve and do all the things we did. Well, let's go directly into medias res. So between 1958 and 1984, the Egyptian Museum of Bonn University and also the Egyptology seminar, which was led by Professor Elmar Edel, who you also see there in the left photo at the lower part, was conducting excavations at the so-called Gubbet el-Hawa, which is this rock-cut necropolis opposite of Aswan. This is a very important site in Egypt because it comprises rock-cut tombs and other kind of funerary contexts dating from the Old Kingdom until the New Kingdom. In addition, many of the old tombs that were hewn in the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms were then in the so-called Egyptian late period reused, not the burial chambers, but the so-called funerary chapels, so the accessible parts. And in this case, we are focusing on a tomb that is called Gubbet el-Hawa 207. This tomb was excavated in 1969. And in this tomb, the colleagues of the Egyptology seminar of Bonn found this late period use phase of this tomb. You see a plan of all the different kind of coffins, anthropomorphic coffins that were put into the older Old Kingdom rock-cut chapel. And there is also one particular burial that is here called Begräbnis 1, so burial 1, that was also obviously the last burial that was put into this reuse phase here. And together with this burial, we see this one ceramic pot, and it's a little bit enigmatic what this pot means there, and also what this pot contained, because we have some archival documents which in which this pot is called Schatztopf in German, which means treasure pot. And there are also some indications that some of the objects that are connected with metallurgy and the objects that I'm going to introduce to you today were indeed all, or most part of which were all found in this pot, and this ceramic vessel was then deposited also here in this tomb context. Unfortunately, or given his Egyptology interest, Elmar Edel was not that much interested in the late period occupation phase of these tombs. He was more keen on finding Old Kingdom architecture, Old Kingdom texts, and going back to the initial use phase of the tomb, which affected then the level of documentation of the late period contexts. However, when we approached, or when we started the project at Bonn University, were also going through all the paper and written documentation in order to make sense of what really happened there, using the diary of the excavation and using all other kind of written material. So we are not 100% sure that this set of technological artisanal objects were all deposited in this tomb, but we know for sure that at least a few were. So we at least can connect all the objects that you're going to see now with this little deposit close to burial 1. We know that there is at least one little statue of Isis. Interestingly, her head has been added in wax, so we already see some modification, the use of a particular material. Then there are other remains of wooden inscribed fragments and one major important casting mold, which you see here, but we are going to see it later. And then there are more objects that belong to this context. There are a few, only these 2 bronze statues, one Isis Hathor, still with the wooden base, a little Nefertem, and then a wide range of casting molds, meaning technological objects that are in the focus of my talk today, as well as composite parts of statues, like these wooden beards for Osiris statues, some amulets, and also some objects made in clay. So it's a very fascinating and unique mix of particular types of materials, as well as iconographies, as well as objects that in a way are related to the technology that we are going to discuss today. What is really in the center of my talk today are the casting molds. So we will talk about them later, and this is just highlighting those pieces. And in addition to the casting molds, you also see in the mosaic image on the lower left, you see in the center these 3 little wax figures. They are of importance. To the left of it, you see also a ceramic mold with a negative form of an Osiris. This kind of wooden piece to the right is also an object with which one could serially produce these little wax figures. And then indeed there's also a little figure of a cat here in wax. So it's an interesting starting point. I already mentioned the so-called lost wax casting technique. So the direct solid casting is the thing that we are concerned with today. Here in the form, in some what we call lost form. And this is then important because generally it's called in a lost form, but here with the unique Gubert El Hawa assemblage, we have an array of preserved forms, which also for the first time really allowed us to have this kind of detailed insights into materials and technologies and technological concepts. Just to recap briefly, The kind of direct solid casting in this lost form works as follows. At first, a wax model is created. This can be done by hand, but in other cases, it can also be done with this kind of negative form where you use a little bit of wax and you malleable wax, you put it in, you press it in, and then you have at least one side of an object. And in most cases, or in some cases also, the Osiris figures are only one-sided. So the wax models that you see in the center are indeed equivalent more or less to the negative form that you see. So we have this link between those. And the other wooden rod with these weird forms at the lower end, they also have a little smaller negative forms of Osiris. So there are 3 of these on this rod, and we also believe that this is a tool for the serial production of little figures of Osiris made in wax. And these wax models are then encased in several form layers of ceramics, depending on also the technological approach. Once the wax has been fully coated with the investment layers, the mold is then heated or even fired to let the wax run out, but also to properly ceramically fire the mold to make it stable for the following casting. And then obviously this mold is used for casting. So the metal is cast inside the cavity that is present in the mold. And after the cooling, this is key, the mold needs to be destructed because it's a ceramic mold. In order to really reach the object, one needs to completely destroy the mold in order to uncover the cast, and then the cast is finally worked. There are a number of other sites and contexts from which fragments of ceramic mold layers are known. So for instance, from Athens, the Agora, and from Olympia, and also on Elephantine Island, but this is a metal workshop dating to the Byzantine period. But let's say in general, casting molds, ceramic casting molds for the solid casting of bronze figures are almost unknown, and therefore the Gubbat al-Hawa assemblage is of particular importance for the study of this kind of technology. And you can see it here also in the title, complete molds preserved. So we really see here a unique, this find provides a unique insight into a range of molds that were made to later be used for casting. Obviously, there are also many other questions connected with this find. So why was this assemblage deposited in this tomb? Why were these technological objects deposited in a tomb? Why were some of these casting molds never used? So what kind of ontological or magical meaning they have in the Egyptian religious context in this tomb? But this is not our concern today. Let's more focus on what we can learn about the technology. So you see here a range of these molds, and which are the ones that we are going to discuss in the following. What is also nice to mention here is that Elmar Edel himself is known as a philologist and a person who was more keen on texts. But since in his student years he was working with Günther Röder at Berlin, and Günther Röder is the German person who wrote these 2 monumental books on bronze figures in German museums, Elmar Edel was aware of this technology and had an idea. Maybe when the team at the Gubbat al-Hawa came across these pots, he then decided, okay, this is an assemblage worth bringing back to Germany, which was back then still possible. So, and thanks to this decision of Edel to take the pieces with him to Bonn, where there are also other pieces from the Gubbat al-Hawa, allowed us to really study these pieces in more detail. More or less immediately after the objects arrived in Bonn, it seems that Elmar Edel himself turned into an archaeometallurgist, because he showed a keen interest on looking inside those let's say amoeba-shaped and other kind of weird formed objects. And at the University of Bonn, then the first X-ray examinations were undertaken, And you see here one of the casting molds, let's say the technological highlight of the collection, and with two X-ray images, which show the complexity of the bronze, of the already cast little bronze figures of Osirises. They all are all hanging down from one central casting channel, but we also see that some of the figures were not fully cast. There are some mistakes that happen. So we see here something like a failed cast, but nevertheless, also based on the information, this kind of reconstruction drawing could be done, where we see 42 little Osiris figures hanging down, all connected to one gating system. Obviously, the gating system also made in wax and then connected to the funnel. So it's really an exceptional and also sophisticated approach in making the wax model and then encasing it and casting it. And then you see on the right some other X-rays. So in 1971, the Bonn people already knew, let's say, for what kind of Egyptian statuettes and bronze these casting molds were meant for. And in other cases, like the casting mold on the left, we see they already knew that some casting molds represent failed castings because there are already bronze remains inside. Others, as the one that you see on the right, is completely empty. There is no bronze. So this is indeed a casting mold that was ready to be used, but was never then used for decasting. Thanks to the fact that the objects were at Bonn and thus also available for all other kind of archaeometrical or natural scientific studies, we then also started a collaboration with the Landesmuseum Bonn, in particular Frank Willer, who's also a well-known metallurgist and goldsmith and an expert in archaeometallurgy, really helped us to find ways and do some particular studies. Here we see him doing some microscopy. So we also wanted to look at the fabric of the ceramic. We wanted to look inside of the molds in order to see what kind of materials are there, or what can we already see in using microscopy. And we also did some samples of the wood in order to do, because of this wooden rod, in order to determine also the species. Next to this microscopy, we also employed a synth section, and they were then studied under a polarizing microscope by Gerwohl Schneider from Topoi, Berlin. And this allowed us also to mineralogically understand better what these kind of casting molds were made of. What we understood that that generally local Aswan geology-based material was used and for making the casting molds. And you already can see here in the two images that there are also some different kind of fabrics or different kind of matrices, which then are related to different layers of the molds that we will see in a minute. Yeah, so here we see the documentation shot of one little cut-out element, and then the resulting thin section microscope images. As you have seen in one of the first slides, there were also a number of little statuettes of Egyptian gods, part of the assemblage. So we then also did some drill sampling, because we at the Bonn Museum decided that we want to do, let's say that we want to gather solid data and not use superficial handheld XRF. So we decided to drill into the pieces, and this allowed us then also to a better understanding of the individual composition of the pieces. We learned that it's bronze, obviously. We learned that there are kind of different percentages of lead, and this is then interesting when we compare these lead shares with the motive of the object. So it seems that the more complicated the cast motive is, the more lead was used. So this might really be a deliberate decision by the craftspeople. On the other hand, we also see huge variety in the individual metal samples. So In the past, other people like Günther Röder or also Mommsen and now I forgot the name of another major German person who studied lots of metal, Egyptian pieces of metal in German collections. He was more thinking about regional differences of metal recipes, and he was more thinking of chronological differences. But if we think of the Gubbet el Hawa assemblage really as a contained assemblage in which all the pieces are maybe even made in the same workshop, were deposited in the same period of time. So we have a coherent set of pieces that we then, in this coherent set of pieces, see all this kind of variety, then leads to other kind of questions and answers. So it's then maybe more connected to the deliberate choices of particular alloys, alloy mixes, or individual day charges, or different kind of accessibilities of the raw material for the Little Bronx workshop that was most likely active on Elephantine Island than in the late period. So we're talking 26th to 27th dynasty in Egyptological terms. Thanks to the drill samples, we could also perform lead isotope analyses, which was done by Roland Schwab at Mannheim. And here we see that the major part of the isotope ratio maps quite nicely with the amines or the fingerprint from Laurion. So it seems that indeed the lead at least came from this major lead source. We were obviously also interested in understanding these little wax figures. Here we used Raman, and we see two printouts of the Raman spectroscope here. We have put a recent wax sample next to it, and we have the Egyptian wax sample under it in black, and we see indeed we have what has until now not yet been addressed, but which is under study with colleagues in Belgium currently, is also the question of the red color. So what kind of red pigments or other kind of colorants were used to make these little wax figures, or the wax that was used for making these wax models. How was it colored? How did it receive this kind of reddish color? And this was done at the Steinmann Institute at Bonn by Professor Thorsten Geisler-Wirwille. In addition, we also sampled lots of the organic pieces. So they were then the samples were then sent to Munich, and there we learned that the negative form, there is some beeswax adhering. The other wooden rod with the three elements, these three elements contain also beeswax, but pistachio resin, which is then interesting. And the other pieces, again, were identified as wax. So we try to also always confirm our visual interpretation of the material with natural scientific analyses. We were also thinking of understanding the chronological context patterns. We did some C14 dating also with Mannheim. Unfortunately, all the dates date between 750 and 420, which is the proper period of the so-called Hallstatt plateau. So we don't really get any kind of more precise C14 dating. However, if we use the archaeological and typological dating, we arrive at a time of 550, 500 BC for this whole set. And now we are slowly approaching the highlight of our studies, namely the use of microcomputer tomography that we did with the with the Bundesanstalt für Materialforschung at Berlin in 2014. It's already 10 years ago, with the help of Dietmar Meinl. And what was nice, that the casting molds all had a nice dimension, and they could all be put alone or in groups in these kind of rotating elements, and then we could do the X-rays like micro X-rays, and they could then be in the computer be registered, and the artifacts, they could then be reconstructed in order to get really amazingly high resolution 3D representations of those casting molds. And here we see some of them, and we are approaching, let's say, these casting molds from the less technological, spectacular to the more sophisticated ones. So here we see these three little casting molds, which you can see on the right, then one rendering of the micro-CT data. In the largest one, so let's focus on the largest one, we see on the one hand that there is a fine innermost layer that was made around the wax. So there is some wax still inside of it. So that means that the wax was not fully burned out or molten out. And there is this fine layer, and then there is another secondary layer where you can already see, I hope, that it's more coarse and obviously made of a different kind of fabric. In addition, we also see this little dot or this little bar, which was then also already, the hole was left in the wax model, and then this hole was filled with the innermost fine casting mold, so that also the final cast little metal bead element would retain this hole. The other casting mold below is also of a very interesting form, and also here we see that's completely empty, so there is no organic material inside, and we immediately realize that it's in the form of an Egyptian heart amulet. And once when there was this wax model, it was then also covered in one first finer layer of casting mold material. This was then covered with another secondary, more coarse layer. And this coarse layer was then also the one that was connecting the funnel that you see on the lower side to the major piece of the casting mold. And we continue with another casting mold where also from the outside one could already guess what this was made to be what this was made to cast with. And here we also see it's completely empty. With the 3D reconstruction of all the micro-CT sections, we could also then create this digital rendering of the inner volume, so we could revive, let's say, the little Anubis figure that was meant to be cast with this mold. What is missing here is the lower casting funnel, which one moment of time broke off. We don't have any remains of this. Then we have another casting mold more tubular, and here we see a huge blob of bronze in the upper part, which is sitting there, but the rest of the iconography and the remaining hollow parts allow us also to identify this as a casting mold for the Egyptian goddess Anuket. And for us, the presence of this blob of bronze suggests that this was a mold that was used. So at least a drip of bronze was filled in, but then maybe the bronze charge didn't, or the craftspeople didn't continue, or they already cast another series of other pieces. So this was the last one in a row, and there was the charge didn't suffice. So they then left this like this, and we can also then fill the void between the inner casting mold layer and the bronze again with, let's say, we can fill it digitally and also recreate the face of the goddess in this case. Here we see a larger, let's say, sausage-shaped mold, which is also rather weird. In the 70s, one already knew that it was made for Isis, so a seated figure of the goddess Isis suckling the little Horus sitting on her lap. And with the CT analysis, we then could really nicely look inside, and we here see, this is something particular for this mold, we see 4 different layers of the casting molds, which are getting coarser from the inside to the outside. So each layer that was added was made of a different kind of fabric. So we see a very special, sophisticated use of different technological ceramics here. We also see that there are a number of metal pieces inside. All the black elements in the X-ray indicate the presence of metal. So this also suggests that this was a casting mold that represents a failed cast. What is missing here is a bit the funnel or the gating system through which the metal was supposed to be filled in. So there are still some questions to be solved in this regard. However, Frank Willer also used this casting mode in order to think about the let's say flow of metal, or the flow of the little charge of metal that was filled in, and how this little charge of metal ended up in the mold. So obviously all the molds needed to be cast upside down. So each of these figures was cast or was put with the feet up, and then the hot bronze charge was filled in to really reach down into the mold and then fill the whole inner void in the mold up. Here we see another larger casting mold, and now it's getting even more exciting, I would say, at least for me. Here we see then a mold that was made to cast 2 Osiris figures, larger ones, standing back to back. So with the other molds that we saw, they were all made for 1 piece, more or less, except the mold with 42 thin Osiris figures. But here we see a mold made for 2 figures. We also nicely see the different kind of fabric, the different kind of texture of the casting mold layers. We see where the funnel was attached to the body of the casting mold. We see a number of voids and breaks in the mold. We see also metal pieces being part of the fabric. So this allows us to tell some individual stories also of the of how these molds were indeed made. Another technological highlight is this mold that is called Gubert-Illhauer 207 number 40. From the outside, it looks rather unexciting, I would say. However, when you look closely, one also from the outside sees the 4 or some metal elements protruding from the mold layers. So one knew, okay, there are some elements, some bronze elements inside. And when we then did the micro CT, we learned indeed that the metal elements are only part of the feet. There are 3 shorter and broken feet elements, and then there is 1 larger element of the upper body, including the feet of an Osiris. This is the one with the red arrow. And what we also learned then is that inside the remaining hollow or voids of the casting molds, there are then Osiris figures modeled in wax on top of those figures. At first we were also thinking, okay, this might be a casting mold with a failed casting attempt. But then we also found that there is some gold leaf adhering to the larger foot or the larger Osiris with the feet here, which then allowed us to understand that these are indeed fragments of Osiris figures that were available, let's say, and that were then put into a mold, and then an additional the remainder of the body of Osiris was then modeled in wax to, let's say, connect at least the bronze feet and the wax figure in the mold together. And then theoretically, maybe the idea was indeed to melt out the wax and cast new metal onto those feet in order to, let's say, reconnect and recreate the Osiris anew. But this is also then something that needs a little bit more discussion, but we have discussed this already in a recent paper where we also connect this with a ritual dedicated to Osiris on Elephantini, because In the mythology of Osiris, Elephantine is also the place where the leg of Osiris, not only bigger, is venerated. So these casting molds could not only have a technological side, but could also have played a role in other kind of magical contexts. This is then only the determination of the presence of gold on the one foot here. We don't need to continue with this. And then there is another mold of the same type. Oh no, this is also 40 of the same type. And here we, no, let's go back. The one of the same type, and where you then also in the individual sections on the left, see the presence of the wax that is really still remains in the hollow cavities. When we then continue, there is another casting mold that has the number 39. And this is more or less of the same typology. So there are these little bronze feet of Osiris figures sticking out, but at least the silhouette of an Osiris figure is also appearing. And based on the microcomputer tomography, we learn that we see the same pattern here. There are already existing fragmented bronze feet of Osirises that are then upon which wax Osirises were added. And then in the center image, you see an Osiris hanging upside down. And this is a particular piece because in this case, this is an Osiris which consists of a broken foot element, a broken torso element, a broken head element. And what we learn when we look at the micro-CT renderings here, we on the one hand learn that the body and the feet do not belong together, so they are not pertaining to the same object. However, the head and the torso are, and we also see that the head was connected to the torso, which in this case is also a hollow cast, by a little possibly iron rod. And when we look closer into the CT sections, we see that the whole figure of Osiris, so all the metal parts that were, let's say, attached or reattached, were covered with a layer of wax, which then would be in the end lead to the idea, the moment the wax is molten out, the moment new bronze would be cast in, that this whole new, let's say, reconstruction or mending layer would flow over the whole body and would in this way then not only technologically reunite these fragments, but would also, let's say, mythologically reunite Osiris, which was cut in pieces by his evil brother Seth in the Egyptian mythology. And indeed, there are other objects that have only recently been, well, not recently, but lately been studied. This is the so-called Angus technique, or the so-called cast-on technique. There are a number of objects in several museum collections who show this approach, which is using two fragments of one figure and then connecting them by a mechanical cast over ring or element in order to reattach those broken pieces together. I'm currently looking for more examples, and indeed, in most cases, in museum magazines, many of those pieces appear. So this is a very interesting, also technological approach. Why was it necessary to kind of mend such bronze figures? And also at Museo Egizio in Turin, there are a number of bronzes that were mainly stored in a magazine who show the same cast on, let's say, cast on repair or mending technique and approach. So something really to study also a bit more in detail in the future. And speaking of this kind of cast-on technique, or the idea of reattaching already existing metal elements, we see some other very interesting casting molds, such as this one, where the channel and the funnel are properly oriented or placed on top of an area, which is here still filled with wax, and this area with wax connects a metal piece or two metal pieces on one side and two metal pieces on the other side. So also here, it feels a bit as if the ancient craftspeople were at least attempting or thinking about, could it be possible to reattach these fragments by casting in this case, the missing part. However, obviously, this was not done with this casting mold, and it might also, or it was definitely in the end not successful, because casting bronze on an already existing bronze doesn't really fit. It would only create the same morphological surface, which might then mechanically stick together, but not fuse metallurgically. The final piece that I'm going to show you now is this one here. You see, again, things that you already saw. So here we see a casting mold meant to cast a figure of a Hippocrates. And we see these different kind of casting mold layers. So the finer one surrounding the inner void, a more coarser one, an attached funnel. So there is a particular consistency in the technological approach. We then digitally filled the void of the casting mold with color here. And we then used this kind of digital fill to turn this into a 3D model. And this 3D model we then used to print this in a, 10 years ago, 3D printing was rather maybe not a new thing, but was an up and coming, interesting thing to do. So we then printed this Hippocrates figure in 3D. And we then used this one, and you also see the quality of the printer. So it was a filament printer. So you see all these kind of horizontal lines. Today, this would look much smoother. And we used then this first printout to mold this printout in wax and create new reproductions of the original wax model, and use this wax model, so the modern wax model, then to recast, let's say, the Hippocrates figure that was supposed to be cast with the original Egyptian mold. So also here with lots of, let's say, transformations of matter from a void in the original casting mold to a digital fill, to printing the fill into plastic and doing a recast, and led us to finally come up with the bronze. We also did some experimental archaeology to kind of, I'm about to finish, so no worries. I see you maybe telling me 5 minutes or even less. And we also did some archaeometrical studies in order to better understand the approaches and techniques. And we also didn't do these kind of things for fun. We not only did one series of castings of Osirises, but we really did 50 of each type, in each case changing parameters, in each case changing fabric mixtures, in each case changing some elements. So really trying to also methodologically approach this. If you want to learn more about this, there are some publications available. One is exhibition catalog of the Gegossene Götter exhibition that was done in 2014-15 in a number of German university museums and the August Kästner Museum in Hanover. And then the final publication is this book, Materialien einer Gusswerkstatt von der Gubbet el-Hawa, which presents all the studies, all the details, and all the things that I said in more depth. I have also published a number of articles, so please feel free to have a look, or then later get in contact with me if you need some more data information. We are very happy to share what we have. As I already said, again, thanks to the Fritz Thyssen Stiftung, and then another big list of participants, because as you have seen, such an interdisciplinary project is really only possible by the input and help by many other colleagues providing us, or who provided us with their individual expertise in their different kind of fields of study. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Johannes, for this fascinating presentation that really showing us the potential of CT microtomography in order to understand better technology of these items. Yeah, I have personally experience with another project that involves pottery from the pre-dynastic site that is kept at the Museo Egizio with your colleague Federica Ugliano, and really the potential of this technique in order to understand better technology is absolutely fascinating. I don't know if there are questions, but since we are running a little bit late, I would propose to keep potential question for Johannes at the end after the talk of Miliana. Johannes, is it okay for you if we keep we take your question in 45 minutes?
Yeah, sure. I will stay connected. Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, we can be in time. So it is